Let me turn now to Greg, to Sana, and Michael, and let me start by taking a very long step back for those viewers who aren't familiar with Lost in Translation. Tell us a little bit of the backstory of Lost in Translation. Where did it come from, and what's the guiding principle?
Oh, yes. And actually, it's funny because Lost in Translation was our original title. So I think you've seen through to us, but Rough Translation is what we're.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Rough Translation. But honestly, sometimes I throw in Lost in Translation because it is more memorable. Yeah, can take you back to the beginning. Actually, it's interesting thinking about, well, thank you first for this award from the committee. And also, even listening to Jane just reminds me what a pleasure it is to work with Jane on this. Even her answer about Mosul, which was about Mosul as an idea. I mean, you just don't get to hear that in a lot of reporting as to how people relate to their place. And I think the idea fundamentally of Rough Translation was that we were going to take these very intimate, not only storytelling journeys through places, but that we were going to see places through the eyes of the people there, and really give it a sense of place that way, and do that with the help of obviously people who are based there, correspondents, as well as interviews, very in-depth, intimate interviews with people there. And so the idea, the tagline we have is stories of places far off that hit close to home. That hit close to home really speaks to, because when you hear about something from somebody's perspective, it doesn't feel far off anymore. It feels like what they're struggling with is what we are. And so we started, technically in 2017, and we're now on our 4th season of the show. And
so how many pieces per season does that turn out to be, and what staff of correspondents do you have to draw on?
Well, the staff is easy. I mean, essentially, we have NPR's 17 international bureaus, which and we have now, because of coronavirus, these Zoom calls with them. So it's kind of brought us all closer together, and we chat about stories, which is an incredible opportunity. We also report some stories ourselves and get some freelance pieces as well. In terms of seasons, actually, also because of the coronavirus, we actually stopped being seasonal, and we started, even though I just said we were on our 4th season, we now go every 2 weeks. So so we're here.
One of the amazing things about podcasting is that this piece runs almost 40 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. It's got different moving parts to it. That's something you can't do even in what would have passed for long form on radio until relatively recently. How big a team did it take to put this together? We focus on Jane because she's the star, but obviously it takes a village.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I one of my favorite parts of the podcast is honestly reading the credits, because then we start going through all the people who are involved down to the level of mastering and fact checking. So it's a very long list. But in terms of those who were involved on it, we had, Michael May was, you've introduced already, Michael May, field producer. We also had a producer at Rough Translation, as well as somebody else who was producing. So we kind of 3 producers. The main editor was Marianne McCune, also who was awarded on this award. Sana Krasikov, who's right here, and as well as many other people who then listen to drafts, and it kind of goes on and on.
And so, talk a little bit about the process. How long did it take? It may be difficult to remember at this remove, from conception to reporting to editing to production.
I mean, Michael, I feel that, do you remember? I feel this took quite a while.
I see, it sort of well, just to tell you a little bit about my role. So I'm not actually on the Rough Translation team. I run the Story Lab, as you mentioned, and I accept call outs from staff at NPR. And in fact, Rough Translation was one of the first pitches I got. So I was there at the very beginning for the very first story that Greg did for Rough Translation, we worked on together. And I think this one came sort of out of one of those call outs at the very, very beginning. Jane had written a pitch that was totally different. And this is often, I will say, hats off to Greg. When Greg gets his hand on an idea, he sees things often that other people don't. But Jane, I believe this sort of came out of a pitch you had given about your own experience wrestling with the destruction that you'd witnessed in Mosul. And a dead body was in that pitch. Is this ringing a bell? It's been so long, but this is how I remember it kind of coming together. You had pitched a story about a body of a young, you assumed was a young ISIS fighter, that it was just, people were just walking around this body, and it was sort of a meditation on that experience. And you wrote a really beautiful pitch, and I brought it to Greg, and we started talking about it, and you were like, you're really interested in this. We got you on the phone, and we started just peeling back, and ended up, well, I came obviously to Mosul, and then we sort of identified these two. We actually interviewed a lot of other people as well. I mean, this is getting maybe a little off, but one thing when you said, are they ordinary people or extraordinary people? I had the benefit or I guess a different perspective from Jane, in that I'd never been to Iraq before, and certainly had all the kind of preconceptions that I think most people listening would have had about what Mosul would be like. And one thing that stood out so much to me, and I'll never forget being there, is that we went to this book festival. There's a scene from it in the story, but this voluntary spirit, it's true, these were extraordinary, but it was very widespread among young people in Mosul, and was so incredibly inspiring. It was so fun to have people be like, oh, you got back from Mosul, just giving me this look like that must have been harrowing. And I was like, it was actually inspiring. And people would just like raise their eyebrows. And I would start talking about this book festival. And I remember the first thousands and thousands of people showed up at this book festival. There were places like when they were giving out free books and stuff, you could hardly move. It was so crowded. Thinking about that now kind of gives me the willies, but this was before coronavirus. And the first person that approached me was like a 20-year-old, and he comes up and I'm just like, he's so excited to be at the book festival. Within a minute, he's talking about how he wants to start a hospital. It's like a 20-year-old, like pre-med at college. And he's like, he's like, I don't want to leave Iraq to go to America or Europe. I believe in my city, and I want to start a hospital. This is not someone who made it into our story, but I'm just telling you, this is the kind of spirit that we found in Mosul. So sorry, I just felt like I should share that, because it was just so widespread. And so anyway, so that's how I remember the basically how this came about and how I got involved, because I'm not involved with every, this is probably only my fourth or fifth story that I've really been deeply involved with Rough Translation on.
And Sana, as I mentioned, you played an important role in shaping the story, in structuring the story, and it's one of the things that's engaging about it, in fact, is how complex it is. It's built around two main characters, but there are 3 or 4, perhaps 5 chapters in it, if you like. There is a narrative arc that carries the listener through and ends up illuminating the rather complex and subtle themes that the story is really about. So how on earth did you do that from the safety of North America?
Well, I think for us, the biggest challenge is that there's so much good material, the correspondence, especially the material that Jane brought. And what Michael was saying, there were actually other characters and other acts of volunteerism that was sort of had to comb through, because there was just such a wealth of amazing characters and amazing actions. And so I do remember we were trying to decide if we could pull off doing this as a story of more than one character. And I know you were really committed to doing both of them. You said that, to really show the bigger picture of the city, you need both of these characters. So I remember Jane just said that Safwan's bigger goal was to normalize non-corrupt behavior. And it recalled for me that kind of a big difference between dramatic logic of a podcast and the kind of thematic logic of a piece of journalism is that they're somewhat inverted, and oftentimes the biggest idea doesn't lead, but sort of waits to the end. And I do recall, it's interesting you noted the 5-act structure, because it really was, the frame of Jane, and then it was 2 turns for each of the characters. And then the second, I remember that second turn, because I think it was like in a parking lot that it hit us when Safwan was walking around trying to connect these pipes. And until he's challenged by this man who wants the pigeons, we don't actually reveal what his deeper motivation is. And that, it's all about really extracting the motivations of these people. And they're not, there's the thing that they're doing, right? The action that they're, and then there's what they really deeply want. And oftentimes, if we were to write it as a piece of journalism, you'd lead with that. He wants to normalize non-corrupt behavior, but sort of, I remember we saved it to the end and kind of used the pipes as a metaphor for what's underneath the city that he's really trying to alter. And that essentially became the second turn for him. So kind of, it was nice, and it was more challenging with her because we didn't have an ending until Jane brought us that end.
Until reality happened.
Yeah, until reality happened.